Welcome to the Clothe in Glory campaign, where we hold gender justice conversations. This is one of 7 episodes that are available on YouTube. You can find the rest of the videos in our playlist under Clothe in Glory.
My name is Paola Fuentes-Glycorn, and I'm the Immigration and Women and Girls Campaign Manager for Sojourners. It is truly a privilege for me to be able to host these conversations with all of you, to get to know you, to connect, and to learn from this shared wisdom that we all have, and then to also be able to host wonderful speakers like the one we will have today. So today's conversation will be centered around that fashion, faith, and the garment industry workers' rights. We'll have our guest speaker, Céire Kealty, who will be speaking a little bit more on what are the current injustices that garment industry workers face, but then who is working for justice, and especially highlighting women who are working for justice in that space. Let me introduce our speaker to you. Our speaker today is Céire Kealty. She's a doctoral student in theology at Villanova University, where she's studying fashion theory, spirituality, and ethics. So what better person could we have to come and speak to us about all of this? So I'll go ahead and turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Paola. I am so delighted to be speaking to you all today. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Paola. I'm going to be talking about a topic that's really important to me, and I reference a lot in my own work, and that is garment worker advocacy. The presentation is going to consist of 3 sections. First, I'm going to elaborate on the conditions endured by garment workers today across the world and explain what the industry is like. Second, I'm going to share portraits of 3 advocates who can inspire us this month of May and beyond. And then third, to answer some concerns that were raised, I will share some action items and resources that we can pursue after today's presentation and incorporate into our daily lives. Before I get to that, I just want to offer like a 3 to 4 minute primer on May Day in the garment industry. Worker rights movements have proliferated throughout the world for hundreds of years, and they persist today. On May Day, these groups take to the streets, usually with red flags, as you see on the left picture, banners and booming voices, demanding fair working conditions. The U.S. is not eager to celebrate May Day, and I'm in the U.S. for those of you not there. Also known as International Workers' Day, given its affiliation with socialist, communist, and anarchist groups. So just to provide a really brief backstory on worker rights movements in the US. In the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution was at its peak, you had thousands of people dying every year from long hours and poor working conditions. As Paola mentioned, there was championing of the 8-hour workday, and that was due to the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions, which later became the American Federation of Labor. So there were conventions taking place in Chicago starting in 1884, and this 8-hour workday was proclaimed from and after May 1st, 1886. So on this day, more than 300,000 workers from 13,000 businesses across the US walked out of their jobs. 100,000 people were striking. It was a huge movement. 2 days later, workers began to clash with the police. There was a rally that was planned at Haymarket Square to protest this violence wrought by the police. And the rally ended up being escalated by the police and an unnamed individual who threw a bomb. As you can see in the picture, violence ensued, and today we know this day of bloodshed as the Haymarket Affair. Now, labor parties in Europe demonstrated in honor of the people who died at the Haymarket Affair throughout the late 1880s and 1890. And in time, countries across the world came to embrace May Day, again, except the United States, where this all began. In 1894, US President Grover Cleveland moved the US celebration of Labor Day to the first Monday in September, and this was done intentionally to sever ties with international celebrations out of a concern that, would build support for communism and other radical causes. But this has not stopped the celebrations of garment worker groups in the US and other workers who take to the streets to push for better working conditions. So in the spirit of May Day, I want to say just a few more words about the origins of garment worker unionizing in the US. At the start of the 20th century, there were many garment worker unions that were cropping up throughout the US. In 1900, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, or the ILGWU, was formed, and it later became one of the largest unions amplifying the needs of women and men workers. In 1909, thousands of women garment workers gathered in Cooper Union, which is in New York City, for one of the largest strikes by women workers in U.S. history. These strikers were pushing for safe working conditions, fair pay, and better working hours. Wealthy women joined in solidarity. They were moved by this strike, and then they organized the Women's Trade Union League. From here, another strike called the Great Revolt took place, where 60,000 workers walked out of their jobs to demand fair and safe working conditions. Now, in my group earlier, when we were talking about the passage in James, we discussed the Amazon Union in New York that just took place, the work of Chris Smalls and his colleagues. So as you can see, striking is really effective, and so is organizing and pushing for unions. Back then, the work of these organizations was desperately needed in New York. The city's garment industry was precarious, exploitative, and just plain unsafe. You might be familiar with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. I can recall learning about this in history class. Over 140 women garment workers died as a result of workplace neglect. Many workers tried to flee the burning building, but couldn't because the factory doors had been locked to prevent thefts. Those workers on the upper floors who couldn't escape through the stairwell or elevator either burned to death or they jumped. When I think of this factory disaster that occurred over 111 years ago, it seems like a horrible snapshot frozen in time. Unfortunately, the conditions endured by the Triangle workers were and are still the norm, not the exception, of the garment industry as it exists today. So let's talk about it a little bit. Whether taking place in factories as far as Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or as near as Los Angeles, garment workers' lives are embedded in exploitation. Garment workers endure long work days, usually 8 to 12 hours minimum with mandatory overtime. Workers have reported working until 2 to 3 a.m. during peak seasons and then resuming at 7 a.m. Workers struggle through monstrous quotas or order amounts that are set by brands. Each worker might have to make a minimum of 100 garments every day to meet quotas. And if any of you know how to sew, you'll know that that is not an easy feat. I don't know how to sew. The thought of 100 shirts in a day horrifies me. For the record, we can thank companies for these quotas, as brands insist that new styles have to be churned out every week. I often think about how brands could stop releasing new styles constantly. Quotas would ease, and garment workers would likely be able to focus on quality instead of quantity. Garment workers also receive extremely low pay. Now, this pay varies based on country. Let's say you're trying to make a denim shirt. In the US, a garment worker might be paid $7 an hour, which is still shameful. In Bangladesh, a worker doing the same work might be paid 22 cents an hour. So just to rattle off some minimum wage amounts per month in garment industry leading countries. If you're a garment worker in Sri Lanka, you make $82 a month. In Bangladesh, you make $103. In Cambodia, you make $200, and Indonesia, you make $201 a month. These low wage amounts reveal why the garment industry has left the US and North America. It's often cheaper for manufacturers to have clothing made in South America, Southeast Asia, East Asia. And of course, the workers bear the cost. Now, not every garment worker receives hourly wages. Some receive piece rate, so this is you're paid per item made. That can be as low as 2 to 6 cents per shirt. So again, if you make 100 shirts, you're only coming home with $2. The next time you go clothes shopping and you see a blouse or you see another item that looks like it has crooked stitching or a loose button, I want to challenge you, instead of judging that, to think about the hurried handiwork of those underpaid workers, racing to meet their quotas to avoid their boss's fury and earn some kind of living. Now, speaking of boss's fury, For all sexes, abuses abound in the garment industry. Managers and factory owners shout at workers, force them to stay late, and they physically harm them. Gender-based violence is a huge problem in this industry. 80% of the world's garment workers are women, and they face harassment, injury, and even death just for showing up to work. Pregnant workers are fired, and women are pressured to take pills to stop their cycles so their periods won't disrupt their work. They can be hounded by supervisors and bosses, pressured into sex, and even murdered for refusing advances. So on the left, you'll see a memorial photo of Céire Kealty, who is a 20-year-old Delete garment worker. She produced clothing for H&M and other brands, and in 2021, she was murdered by her supervisor for refusing his sexual advances. Some other hazards at work. Garment workers toil under extremely unsafe conditions. Factories are tightly packed with poor ventilation. Workers are exposed to chemicals and other harsh substances, and they can injure themselves moving product. Some dyes, like azo dyes, have a carcinogenic effect. Waterproof fabrics are made of things called PFAs, and these can cause cancer and endocrine dysfunction, among other things. So on the left, you see photos of workers measuring and cutting dyed fabrics. And on the right, you see a garment worker bleaching denim jeans. This constant and proximate exposure to chemicals in tightly enclosed spaces with dead air often can wreak havoc on the bodies of these workers. Now, there is more I could say here, but later on in the summer, we'll be having another guest presenter talk about environmental issues associated with the garment industry. So I will leave my comments on chemicals at that. But these aren't the only workplace hazards. These photos, which are really striking, depict the aftermath of the Rana Plaza disaster. In 2013, a horrific factory fire and collapse in Dhaka, Bangladesh, claimed the lives of 1,112 garment workers. They'd reported to their supervisors that there were cracks in the factory ceiling and walls. Their supervisors told them to go back to work. So as the factory collapsed, many workers tried to flee, but similar to the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, several doors were locked to prevent thefts, so they were trapped. This disaster seized the world's attention in 2013, and numerous unions in Bangladesh banded together to establish something called the Bangladesh Accord, and this legislated safe working conditions in factories in Bangladesh. Unfortunately, garment workers still continue to endure unsafe working conditions, and the most recently renewed international accord still requires companies to sign on or opt in, and a lot are reluctant to do so. I want to just take a moment. I just threw a lot of very upsetting information at all of you. Every time I revisit this, I just am so hurt by it. This information is heavy. There's a lot of suffering underlying this industry and is lurking in our wardrobes too. But I want to give us cause for hope to counteract any despair you could be feeling right now. So now I'd like to draw your attention to three incredible women who are working to secure justice for global garment workers. These three women, Nazma, Marissa, and Ayesha, and the organizations to which they are affiliated, can be a source of inspiration and guidance to us, not only in commemorating May Day, but working towards solidarity in May and beyond. So let me begin in Bangladesh with Nazma Akter. Nazma is known as one of Bangladesh's foremost labor leaders. She started working in garment factories alongside her mother at age 11. She would sew for 10 to 14 hours every day. After witnessing countless workplace abuses, she decided to work alongside trade unions to participate in workers' protests in the 90s. During that time, gender discrimination against women labor leaders was very common. So she decided to establish her own trade union federation. She called this union Samalito Garment Ceramic Federation, or SGSF. Today it has over 70,000 members. And her work didn't stop there. In 2003, Nazma founded the Awaj Foundation, which is an organization promoting workers' welfare. So just to say a couple of things about the Awaj Foundation. This organization offers an impressive variety of projects and programs that help support garment workers at their best and their worst. So just to say a few things. The UP community-based training program has trained 15,000 workers on topics such as financial management, health, rights awareness, and negotiation tactics. Awaj Foundation has also established the Workers' Voice Report, which is a yearly report navigating the complexity of Bangladesh's ready-made garment industry from the perspective of garment workers. So this report centers the voices and needs of garment workers. It's very empowering. The ALDI Factory Advancement Project trains workers, supervisors, and management to work together on issues like health and safety, workplace cooperation, and effective communication. There's also my personal favorite, the women's cafes, pictured on the right, for example. Women's cafes are community-based centers providing support to garment workers on work-related issues, and they also just offer a safe space for women to breathe and take a break from labor. They offer trainings on labor law, trade unions, sexual harassment, gender-based violence, negotiation tactics, discrimination, and again, they provide support to resolve disputes between workers and management. They are a safe haven for these women. And of course, there are other products I haven't talked about that combat harassment and work towards better wages. So here is just another photo of women's cafes. And this is Nazma protesting with fellow garment workers. Let's move a little closer to home now and turn to Marissa Nuncio. Marissa is the director of the Garment Worker Center, which is a worker rights organization leading an anti-sweatshop movement to improve working conditions for thousands of garment workers in Los Angeles. GWC focuses on direct organizing, training members to demand enforcement of strong labor laws and secure accountability from manufacturers and corporations. So a little bit more about Marissa. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Marissa studied in Mexico, and it's here that she encountered the damage caused by NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Workers in Mexico and elsewhere in Latin America suffered under exploitative conditions and cheap, harsh labor. She joined an organization called Sweatshop Watch in 2001, and this org became a co-founding organization of the Garment Worker Center. Back then, her role was to support the first campaigns of GWC, and today she is the director, so she's directly involved in the missions and workings. So I'd like to talk about a really incredible accomplishment of GWC in the past 2 years. The center has done fantastic work in organizing LA garment workers and demanding better working conditions. Most recently, GWC has empowered garment workers to protest piece rate pay in favor of hourly wages. Now, if you remember, piece rate is getting paid like 2 to 6 cents an item. Hourly is much more stable. In 2020, GWC worked with LA lawmakers to propose a bill that would improve pay for garment workers. The initial bill did die before it could be voted on, but it was revived in 2021 as Bill SB 62, the Garment Worker Protection Act. SB 62 required California to support an hourly minimum wage for garment workers instead of piece rate pay. It also extended the scope of liability for wage and hour violations, so it held manufacturers and factories accountable. Thanks to the efforts of GWC and other organizations, which involved a lot of rallies, a lot of educational events, and quite a lot of pressure, SB 62 was signed into California law by Governor Gavin Newsom in September 2021. And since it went into effect in January 2022, it has improved the livelihoods of thousands of LA garment workers. My third and final portrait is of Ayesha Barenblat. Ayesha is a social entrepreneur whose prior work with fashion brands and sustainability led her to found Remake Our World, which is an organization offering free educational resources, advocacy campaigns, and sustainable brand directories to mobilize citizens and consumers in fighting for a just garment industry. Remake's work is varied. They offer ambassador opportunities, they produce pamphlets, and they organize protests. I've been most impressed by Remake's work during the pandemic. So during the start of the pandemic in March 2020, which feels like an infinity ago, many apparel corporations decided to cancel their orders for the summer season. They figured, well, no one's going to be out buying new clothes if we have lockdown, so we might as well cancel our orders. From a business perspective, this is a wise decision. The problem is that yet again, the workers bore the cost. So many of the orders that had gotten canceled were completed or in process, meaning that the workers had already performed labor, they had done the work, and they had made products that were just being chucked. And corporations, despite this, refused to pay wages owed for these canceled orders. These losses, get ready, were to the tune of $40 billion USD. For a country like Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, whose economy relies heavily on the garment industry, such a blow is devastating. And this is where Remake comes in. Remake collaborated with other organizations like the theology Foundation to establish a campaign called #PayUpFashion, or PayUp for short. By involving journalists, citizens, researchers from Penn State University, and more, Remake endeavored to pressure companies to pay owed wages. They ran this campaign and encouraged consumers to post the hashtag everywhere, spam it on corporate accounts, and hold these brands accountable. And consumers obliged. This hashtag was flooding Twitter, Instagram, and other social media in summer 2020 and continued on throughout 2021 and even today. The campaign was immensely successful. It amassed 270,000 signatures and secured $22 billion of withheld wages. That's not the full $40 billion, but that number continues to climb. These women and their efforts show us the power of collective action. And there's plenty of other examples I could have given you all today. I had to confine it to just 3. That's how immense this movement is. We need to remember that a lot of responsibility falls on the shoulders of these apparel companies. We, like individual, cannot fix it all, but we can, in community and through community organizing, hold corporations responsible and pressure them into doing the right thing. The success, for example, of the Pay Up campaign demonstrates that great good can come out of individual actions because there is strength in numbers. There's strength when we unite. We hold the power to advocate for workers, to stand with them, to amplify and heed their voices, and to effect change in this industry. So I want to answer this question. How can we, as people of faith, or just people who care, show our support? First, I want to suggest we need to be conscientious consumers. There's a lot of buzz around being ethical consumers, ethical shoppers, buying ethical things. I'm here to tell you that ensuring that you're always ethical in your purchases is near impossible. We cannot be perfect. Our faith tradition and other traditions tell us this. I want to free you from this need to be perfect and point you towards being conscientious. In the words of Mexican labor organizer Martín Barrios, we're seeking consumers who know how to research, who know how to examine a whole production chain, who can follow up on the brands and demand information from companies, and so on. So we have our work cut out for us right here. How do we research? How do we examine a production chain? How do we follow up on brands and pressure them? Well, step 1 of that could be we follow and support legislation and policy. It's important that we familiarize ourselves with the policy field and what work is going on right now. So 2 things you can learn about after this conversation today. Internationally, pay attention to the renewed Bangladesh Accord, which is called the International Accord for Health and Safety. This accord is meant to secure safety standards within garment factories in and beyond Bangladesh. The key here, where our work can come in, and I'll say more about this later, is to pressure brands to sign on to this accord, because remember, it's opt-in. Domestically, I recommend turning your attention to the recently proposed Fashion Act in New York. This act aims to hold corporations with revenues of more than $100 million accountable to sustainability and labor standards. Now, it's possible that you're in Canada listening. It's possible you're in a different country. That is okay. I recommend you contact your local representatives and labor organizations. Even if your state, your locale, is not doing any work like this, you can suggest it to them. This is how this work begins. Second, pursue advocacy actions. We might not be lawmakers, maybe some of us on the call are, I'm not, but we can pursue actions that garner support for legislation and foment change. So I want to suggest that you get connected with garment worker advocacy groups. Right here I have a brief list. I have in another document much longer list, but just some examples: GWC, Clean Clothes Campaign, Remake, Asia Floor Wage Alliance. The list goes on and on. And usually when you connect with these groups via email or social media, others pop up too. You can also participate in different campaigns that these and other groups run. You can sign, you can educate yourself and others, and you can donate, because money does make a difference. So 3 things you could do after this call. You can sign the Good Clothes Fair Pay campaign. You can support the #WorkingForJustice campaign. And you can donate whatever amount you feel comfortable doing to the Remake Direct Relief campaign, which right now is supporting the Awaj Foundation. And again, this is all on a list that you'll have access to after. The third thing I want to recommend is to pair your purchases with these actions. Sometimes you can't help but buy something from a brand that's offending, right? The point is not to be perfect, but rather to pair your purchases with actions expressing solidarity. So I want to draw your attention to an action that you could take today or this weekend or whenever. Levi's, the famous jeans brand, benefits from their clothes being made by skillful garment workers in Bangladesh. But the corporation refuses to sign on to the international accord. If you've bought Levi's jeans in the past, if you own anything from Levi's, or you just admire Levi's, and you'd like the workers who make them to be safe, you can do the following today. You can tweet Levi's and say #SignTheAccord. You can comment on their Instagram, their Facebook, or other social media posts. You can send them an email through that link, which again will be on a document, RanaPlazaNeverAgain.org/#act. And you can learn more at the Clean Clothes Campaign website, and you tell your friends. As I said, there will be an action item document made available to you after today's session, where you can learn more and get more in the know. So as we pursue these actions and consider what else we can do and how we're inspired, it's important that we resist despair by clinging to hope. As Pope Francis says, hope opens new horizons, making us capable of dreaming what is not even imaginable. So we have a choice. We can despair from the information we've learned today, or we can cling to hope with our neighbors, our community, and with garment workers who we may not even meet. My hope is that when you get dressed every day, do so with hope for the safety and flourishing of garment workers, other workers, and yourself. My hope is that you can be moved by hope to explore opportunities to support garment workers worldwide and other workers who comprise our human family. Ultimately, our aim should be to restore the dignity of work, and in doing so, maintain the dignity of all people in and outside of work. May this be the start. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for watching one of the 7 episodes of Clothed in Glory. And don't forget to subscribe to support SojoAction's work and see more content like this.